Well, hello and welcome to this panel on 50 years of ecosystem restoration in UNESCO designated sites and networks. My name is Jeremy Wilkes. I'm a science reporter at Euronews, the European multilingual news channel, representing Euronews and also our sister channel, Africa News. And if you've been waiting to hear concrete examples of transformation from around the world for inspiration on ecosystem restoration, then you're in the right place. Stay with us for some amazing guests who are going to share their stories of change and living with nature. And first, to set the scene, I'm delighted to say we have a special introductory message from Mrs. Shamila Nayabaduel, Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences at UNESCO.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure today on behalf of UNESCO to give you a few words on our role and how UNESCO is protecting ecosystems since more than half a decade. A very warm welcome to you from all over the world. I would like to give you just a brief overview of UNESCO's designated sites and the networks, which actually complement and provide concrete examples that will be presented by the panelists today. And I sincerely thank our panelists for giving us this opportunity to learn from them of the concrete examples on the ground and how they promote ecosystem restoration, contributing to the UN decade. Dear colleagues, what is UNESCO's involvement? Well, for over half a century, UNESCO has shown the way and continues to work towards changing mindsets to make progress in sustainability. UNESCO's holistic and intersectoral approach is relevant for the UN decade on ecosystem restoration by providing information on the accumulated experience and its current and its future contribution to ecosystem restoration efforts worldwide. So, dear colleagues, UNESCO's strategy for biodiversity is implemented in all of its designated sites. This covers over 10 million square kilometers, roughly 6% of the Earth's landmass. It is already under one or more UNESCO designations through its 1,121 World Heritage Sites, so 252 natural and mixed sites, 114 cultural landscapes, 714 biosphere reserves in 129 countries, 161 global geoparks. Now, in all of these sites, UNESCO works directly on conserving nature, but UNESCO is also about people. After all, if we want to protect the ecosystem services, we need to have a better understanding of the relationship between people and nature. And this is UNESCO's unique soft power to bring the adverse stakeholders, knowledge holders, decision makers into a dialogue so that together in a holistic approach, we need the whole of society to become change agents for ecosystem restoration movement. So many of UNESCO's designated sites are implementing restoration activities, and the experiences will be shared today. Within the UNESCO designated sites, UNESCO has been a leader to promote the concept of living in harmony with nature and in situ solutions to the global challenges of terrestrial, coastal, and marine biodiversity loss, while also engaging with human culture, education, and values which underpin our decision-making. So UNESCO is also about the soft power to convene diverse interests, diverse cultures, and we emphasize our shared human values for the living and the ethics of care. So UNESCO believes that it is possible to transform mindsets to achieve sufficient momentum to bring change in this critically important UN decade on ecosystem restoration. Youth are key players for ecosystem restoration, which is also about intergenerational solidarity, equity, and continuity. And this is at the heart of UNESCO's mandate. So UNESCO is advocating for conserving biodiversity beyond these protected areas. Humanity needs to be ambitious in reconciling with humans with nature everywhere on the planet, for right now and for future generations, including small island developing states and the numerous specific challenges. The vision has been spread through the Man and the Biosphere program and its World Network of Biosphere Reserves, which celebrates 50-year anniversary in 2021. The 1972 World Heritage Convention is the only global normative instrument addressing both nature and culture and its linkages, and it's providing an international protection status to some of the most important sites for biodiversity and some of the most remarkable ecosystems of our planet. So this convention contributes to safeguarding the world's biological and cultural diversity while enhancing the livelihoods of local communities living in and around World Heritage Sites. Dear colleagues, the contribution of geodiversity, which we don't hear much about, the silent biodiversity's partner to ecosystem restoration, has been addressed through the UNESCO's Geoscience Program and Global Geoparks. This is the only program in the United Nations system that actually values geological heritage. And UNESCO's designated sites, which include the World Network of Biosphere Reserves, Natural Cultural World Heritage Sites, the Global Geoparks, provide the numerous examples of good practices and lessons learned to achieve sustainable development through ecosystem restoration. So within the UN decade for ecosystem restoration, UNESCO is focused on partnerships, diverse stakeholder engagement, working together towards greater intergenerational cooperation. This includes ensuring strong links to two other UN decades that UNESCO is proud to coordinate: the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which is being implemented by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, as well as the International Decade for Indigenous Languages. Both of these decades will support many aspects of ecosystem restoration. At the beginning of the UN decade, it is important to set the baseline of activities in our sites. The MAP program is currently doing so and shall monitor the progression of ecosystem restoration in the World Network of Biosphere Reserves for the next 10 years. This will be a useful contribution to the UN decade. I would like to end my introductory remarks by thanking our distinguished panelists here with us today, our moderator, all the participants from across the world, but also all the member states and all the reserves, World Network of Designated Sites, UNESCO's Biosphere Reserves, and all the World Heritage Cultural Sites for their useful contribution to ecosystem restoration. We need each other. The planet needs every one of us to relook and reconcile our relationship with nature for ecosystem restoration. I thank you very much and wish you fruitful conversation. Over to you, moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shamila. Excellent to hear those messages. Before we move on to our panel discussion, I'm really pleased to welcome live from Nigeria, Professor Adepoju Adesola, the CEO of the Forestry Research Institute of Nigeria and chair of the International Coordinating Council for the UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Programme. Professor Adepoju.
Thank you, Jeremy. Permit me to recognize Madam EDG, Excellencies on board, and other ecosystem restoration actors, and to welcome everybody to this meeting today. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which run from 2021 to 2030, is very significant as it has the same deadline with achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. This is also the decade that scientists must run with speed to recover lost ground orchestrated by COVID-19 pandemic and climate change variabilities. That has resulted in biodiversity loss, deforestation, unsustainable utilization, and conflicts over scarce resources, loss of livelihoods, poverty, to mention just a few. The natural ecosystem offers solution to all these problems. We therefore have to work assiduously and harmoniously to restore our ecosystem and build resilience. We have to maintain our green areas, designated biosphere reserves, and promote biodiversity conservation in order to maintain safe space or spaces between human and nature. To this end, and in my capacity as the chair of MAB-ICC, I'm calling on the Man and Biosphere Network and all MAB entities to support the implementation of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration with appropriate actions that will indeed halt and reverse degradations of ecosystems and make the ecosystem work for our good. It is all about life. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that message, and you're absolutely right. We've got a lot of challenges ahead over this next decade. Let's move on to introducing our panelists, who are going to be talking about how we meet some of those deadlines and some of the achievements that we've already made in the last 50 years around the world. So we have Mrs. Phoebe Samwell, an expert in community development at the Jane Goodall Institute at Gombe, Masito, Ugalla Biosphere Reserve in Tanzania. We have Professor Ove Hoegh-Guldberg, a chief scientist at the Great Barrier Reef Foundation at UNESCO World Heritage Site, and Dr. Nguyen Hoang Tri, professor of ecology at Hanoi National University of Education and representative of the Can Gio Mangrove Biosphere Reserve in Vietnam. Thanks very much for being with us. I want to start by asking you to give me some good news, perhaps some good news from Vietnam on what you've done in terms of ecosystem restoration. Tell me about some of the achievements you've had and what you've learned.
So I think that when it comes to the 50 years ecosystem restoration designated by UNESCO and UN, I give you that it's a good practices from Vietnam, and the Biosphere Reserve is named Cần Giờ. It is 60 kilometers from Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. Yes, you know that we have during the war, all areas that are destroyed by herbicide and during the war. So, but after in 1975, we tried to recover by planting that mangrove species that now. But now is that all ecosystem restored, not only for planted, but almost for natural regeneration. So I think that we have shared with you that some experience or that experience that during the restoration processes. The first thing is that we need that respecting that natural resources, the natural processes, and during that rehabilitation, we follow that succession, and also that species by that one by one we respect the natural. So I think that natural regeneration should be that respected, and also that we follow that process area, that natural, so as much as possible. So I think that our now that mangrove ecosystem is not planted at all, but now it's some planted from beginning, but now all that regeneration, that natural generation, and they call that the natural forest. So I think that we have the first lesson learned is that as much as possible respecting natural. We have to follow natural. The second thing I think is very important to respecting that the linking between human and nature during the restoration. We not follow that not only for natural, but natural to service to as services for local people, and local people come back to restoration of nature. It's for their livelihood, their need of the socio-economic development. So the thing the third thing that is the last one is that we are respecting that the relationship between the people and nature, and also to follow that the thinking about the holistic or the interdisciplinary for during the restoration of natural forests. I think that the piece of the success that the natural, but now is that we have to know that the good practices to do during the restoration. So that Biosphere Reserve is not the name, it's a practices. We have to know that to respecting nature and people. So we follow, we learn from that processes, relationship, and also respecting their stakeholder involvement, not only for government, but also to know all that associate those social media, social activity come together. Even some economic enterprises to come together to mobilize our people to restore. But red stones are not all that planted, but from beginning we have to plant. But plant that's the first thing, and then to follow that natural. So I think that's a step-by-step natural. So should
that's
be
a very interesting point that you make about how you started really from something completely destroyed that you then planted, but then you learned that you needed to respect the natural rhythms and things. I'm going to go over now to Phoebe and tell us a little bit about what you're doing there in Tanzania, and I suppose the success stories from the last 50 years as well. What's been learned and what have you achieved?
Good morning, everybody. Here in Tanzania, we are doing regeneration, as Professor said. Also, we are promoting entrepreneurship activities which are environmental friendly, like wide mushroom collection, beekeeping activities, and tree planting. Also, we are doing land use planning, where we reserve a forest reserve for other activities like that. And our success in these 2 years, we managed to make our area as to have a map managed biosphere reserve status. So this also increasing community to understand the benefit of conservation. Also, a big success, we managed to mobilize the local community to understand the community conservation approach, how to integrate with youth, women, disabled people, to work with together to start income generation activity in small group, and to raise capital and to do other business which are environmental friendly, and to be happy with conservation, restoration of this forest and landscape. So we hope that the community itself now can do the community patrols, they can plant trees, they can see the benefit from beekeeping to increase their livelihood. That's our success in Gombe.
It's fascinating. I think the engagement with the community and the story you have to tell there. And I began talking about good news, starting in Vietnam, where I know there's good news, and going to Tanzania, where it sounds like there is good news. And I'm a bit doubtful about whether there's good news from the Great Barrier Reef. So over to Ove, is there good news on the status of the Great Barrier Reef?
Well, now that I'm unmuted, you can hear the bad news. I'd just like to recognize the distinguished guests and colleagues that are here today. Also to congratulate UNESCO on 50 years of ecosystem restoration across the networks, a breathtaking set of sites and places. And as we've heard, UNESCO has been really a leader in the actions on biodiversity and on land and in the sea. Because at its heart is the idea of science-based decision-making, with science being fundamentally important with the decisions that were made 50 years ago and today. Well, the Great Barrier Reef is one of the most prominent sort of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It's the size of Italy, it's hugely biodiverse, and provides enormous benefits to humans, from fisheries to coastal protection to income from tourism and so on. And the value of the reef and making sure that it didn't decline over time led to things like the largest marine park. Sorry, I sound like I'm boasting, but the largest marine park at the time along the coast of Queensland. And then the eventual listing of the property as World Heritage in 1981. So everything was going pretty well, but unfortunately, the recent decades have showed that the tide is turning and that local and global stresses are now starting to really bite into the health of the reef. And just to give you some idea about where these concerns come from, the corals on the reef have declined by 50% over the last 30 years. That's the sort of engine of the reef system, and a further 50% over the last 5 years of what was left. There's great concern about shark and turtle and dugong populations that have undergone major declines. And these climate models that we have now tell us that even with hard-fought getting to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial, we will have very little left of this magnificent ecosystem. And so we can't stand by and let this thing happen. So we must really develop new technologies by which to sort of face off. And so one of the stories that is sort of a success story in its making in the beginning is a foundation that I work with at the moment that's been in existence for 20 years. It integrates government, university, research, public interest groups, and so on, with trying to find out whether we can restore reefs at a scale that allows us to buy some important time as we struggle with the emission reduction issue. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to discuss this today. And I hope I haven't given you the impression that it's all over, because it's not all over. There is still enormous amounts to be done, but it has to happen with concerted, deep action from international leadership from UNESCO and other bodies. So I'll rest my remarks there and look forward to today's discussions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I want to come back to that and exactly what you do, but I would like to go back to Phoebe if she's still there. I don't know whether she's, I can't see her at the moment. Maybe she's disappeared.
I'm here. I'm here.
Good. They are marvelous. I'm interested in how you engaged the community and how you started the dialogue. And is it, in fact, because the people understood they were in a special place? Do you think that something happened in their minds, or was it a concerted effort in schools with engaging with young children? What do you think changed and engaged the population? Or was it more economic? You were talking about the economic changes that you've made there, encouraging people to sustainably manage. What do you think is the key to success and engaging with the local population?
Yeah, the key is success on engaging the community, because first of all, we have to know that community belongs to, forests belong around the community. So they tend to know that that's called forest or whatever is theirs. So what we do is to go there and to talk to them and to set their priority. And there is some health issues, then we link with health people, some education issues, we link with education people, and then we talk about conservation itself. So they can tell you about water, about having a fuel efficient stove. So we train them multi-sectoral professionals. We bring them as the approach of a participatory approach and talk to them, and then bring children apart in roots and shoots clubs and talk to them about conservation issues, started training them and hear from them. And then we took women aside, we talked to women, and women talk to us their problems concerning on conservation issues. Then we come together and select a few activities to start with. One of the core activity to them was about getting capital to start their income generation activities. So we train them how to mobilize their small money and keep it for 1 month and start borrowing with a small interest. And then we train them on income generation activities. And then we train them how to select the income generation activities. And now they become a teacher for other community, and we respect them and we train them how to lobby and advocate for their rights, to contest, to be leaders in the village. So we started like that. And after a few years, community itself become a conservation friend. They want to conserve, they want to plant a tree, they want to hear the stories about conservation. So we succeeded like that by bringing all age category in the discussion, in the dialogue, by using our project on roots and shoots to educate their children on environmental issues.
How do you see it moving in
school?
How do you see it moving forward? I mean, you've obviously succeeded in engaging people, and it sounds like it's a very holistic approach, not just with schools, but also dealing with kind of people who want to become entrepreneurs and
holistic approach. Yeah, holistic approach.
But how do you move forward then? I mean, what's your ambition for the future? Because it sounds like you've already got to a good place. Where do you want to go?
After that, then we move forward by letting the stakeholders. I heard from stakeholders that some people not consider stakeholders, but to us, we consider stakeholders like district officials, region officials, other NGO, conservation NGO working in the area. So we have a meeting on quarterly basis where we sit together and plan together with stakeholders and stay with community, planning together what is going to happen 2 months, in 3 months. So by doing this, we move forward to another stage. We do land use planning, we do governance issues, and this is an issue of ownership. What we wanted to see is people own these activities, people own this initiative, this is strategy, and not to belong to Jane Goodall, because Jane Goodall is an NGO and will move after some years. But the community itself will be there for a long time. So what we do, we shifted our responsibility, our activities, and trained people to stay themselves.
It sounds like you made a big shift there. I'm going to switch over now to Vietnam and ask to what extent you've had a similar experience and to what extent you had difficulties engaging stakeholders, different kinds of stakeholders in Vietnam, and to what extent in Vietnam you've managed to bring the community with you, and how did you do that? Was it through the kind of education things that we've talked about, or was it other kinds of arguments? Tri, tell us about that. Yeah.
We had said that from beginning that we know that the forest and mangrove forest, that the areas that very important, not only for local people, but also for a whole area. That's a big area. But I think that from beginning that all the stakeholders come together, but not only for discussing, but also for testing that how to plan, how to protect that forest. I think very important thing that we have two kind of the approach of stakeholder involvement. That's from top-down level. We have some is that the role of the government, the central government, and also the city government to come up with that some policy to change that areas from barren, from herbicide area, come to the greening. That's the first one. The second is the bottom up. That from local people, they need that natural resources for their livelihood. So I think that a very important benefits for local people. So I think that two kind of approach, we come together and also to involve that stakeholder. Even now that some experiences that some enterprise, some company to come together to support local people to change their view about the forest, also their livelihood that benefit, and also some together linking between that conservation and ecosystem services. I think that they're very important.
How did you identify the correct stakeholders to talk to then? I mean, was it obvious who you needed to engage in order to get your mangroves into a better state, or were there challenges identifying the right people and getting the correct people actually behind your project?
Okay, so that local people, they realize that how to protect the forest and how to keep that forest come together with natural, but not planted. But we change that transformation from planted into natural. So as they bring that all that ecosystem services, including that fish and shrimp or any, come to their benefits for local people. So that I think that local people, they need that one, and they do that one, and also they get benefits from that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go over to Ove now, who tell us a little bit about what you can do to restore, because we've had a great story about restoration of mangroves, but are you literally able to bring in corals that can regenerate zones? Or how does that work?
Okay.
Yeah, look, I think if you look at the sort of history of the reef and its management and so on, that originally it was about sort of managing the reef as an ecosystem and, you know, gently does it sort of management. What we've seen recently is that that's not working. If you look at that, you know, I talked about the loss of corals. That's a really bad report card. We've also got other issues with water quality and so on. So it's become very clear that we're not doing enough. We're not doing it with the intensity that will have a result. So there's been a big initiative recently that has drawn together the foundation plus a whole network of national and international scientists to sort of address this issue about, can we develop tools that will have a big impact on the ground? Now, this has been going for about 3 years so far, so that's early days, but it really is showing us some really exciting opportunities. For example, corals have billions of babies over their lifetime. If you can just influence a small part of the mortality or the death of those things, you can have a huge impact. So one of the projects is, you know, cheekily called IVF, but it's essentially protecting coral babies before you put them out onto the reef and when they can actually survive and so on. There's also the idea of looking for tolerant corals versus non-tolerant. Just like plants and other animals, there are differences in the population. You know, can we find those, or can we manipulate them so that we get varieties of corals that'll survive, you know, the ongoing temperature stress?
Are there some?
Well, there are some, right? So there's a lot of corals that do a little better than the others, but of course it's not infinite. So in any of these discussions, you've got to say that we've got to drastically cut emissions, or this won't work at all. But there are some very interesting rays of hope here, and some of the technologies are more advanced than others.
So it's not just about managing decline, is basically what you're saying, is you're trying to switch into an active and more active restoration.
Well, exactly. And so in the end, I mean, some combination of flattening the emissions and putting them to zero within the next couple of decades, plus building the resilience of corals and other organisms by, you know, active management or active intervention and so on, so that you can get them through to the middle of this century. And if we can do that, then corals will come back. You know, well, I'm pretty sure of that. I won't be around to be tested on this, but if you can do those two things, deal with the emission issue and then keep corals alive until those conditions exist, we know corals can spread across reefs within 10 years. You can take them out with a hurricane or a cyclone, and you can come back today and find the corals having grown back in. Now, those corals won't be the full assemblage of species, but it gives you hope for the fact that this is not just a futile effort to deal with this problem. And I think we will, as I said.
I'm pleased that you're able to give us a little bit of hope about it, because I think there was a general perception it was a bit of a lost cause, but that there is, with science and some smart thinking, some ways forward. We are talking about UNESCO's work. They now have 6% of the world's surface protected. They want to get to 30%. What do you think the focus areas should be in terms of, have we ignored the oceans for too long, for example? I mean, you're probably going to say yes, because you're representing the Great Barrier Reef, but have we not really are we missing some areas that we should be looking at?
No, I think what we need to be doing is strategic conservation and interventions. For example, when you look at climate change in the ocean, it differs from site to site. There are some regions where you've got oceanic upwelling that cools the surface much more than it would be if you just had a normal water column. And so it's those regions which are really important. And there's a project called Coral Reef Rescue that's identifying those. I'm involved with that project, full disclosure. Identify those sites and then protect them from things like pollution and overfishing, which is still going on in the background. That is the second major threat to reefs. But if you can sort of identify those least exposed areas and then protect them again until you get to mid-century when things will hopefully start to stabilize, then we've got a sort of a strategy by which to not let the unthinkable happen.
Tri, yeah, we've got these biosphere reserves, we've got the World Heritage Sites, we've got the geoparks. There's a goal, as I say, to go to 30%, protecting 30% of the world's surface. Where do you think the focus should be in your part of the world? What are the opportunities out there?
I think that the 30% that globally, I think that is a very good one. But not only for areas or the number, forget it, but we have to focus on the quality of the work. For example, for Biosphere Reserve, for example, is very much appreciated. So I think that how to do that one as the modality for sustainable development. And how is it that sustainable development that how to link between nature and people? So that Biosphere Reserve is a lesson area, a place for everyone to come together, to work together. Is that the message from Biosphere Reserve, but message for globally? I think so.
That's interesting, the concept of it being kind of a learning zone. Let's go over to Tanzania. I mean, you've obviously achieved that. You have engaged your population and you've taught them. Tell us about how you would see things expanding in other parts of the world where you are, and to what extent you see that as a valid model to kind of bring people in, show them what can be done, and then say replicate that where you are.
We have a main approach, like in this project we are working with now. We are piloting and learn how to integrate conservation and family planning issues. Because when we go to the village, you can see that families having many children. So we are integrating our family planning and conservation to see if we can send our message on conservation against the population of the people. So we have this approach, population health and the environment, PHE. We are working to see if we can mobilize people and say about conservation and population. So far we are doing very fine because people understood that our forest is the same, our land is the same, our plot is the same, but we are increasing in numbers. So they are now spacing their child, and we see some impacts and stories. So by doing this, and we hope we will go there. If you go to some villages, there is some restoration of the forest, which lost many years ago, water coming back, some natural tree coming back. So you can see this is eliminating the restoration of ecosystem. And now we are in the mobilizing people to acquire their land, to be given status of the land so they can own the land. And by doing this, they can save away all the forest reserve for each forest and have one forest reserve for as a benefit of livelihood and other environmental issues. And apart from that, we are mobilizing children in school on environmental issues and family planning issues. We talk to them in the clubs, we talk to women, we talk to young girls. I think by doing all this, we're gonna reach there. I'm seeing the progress in our landscape. Yeah.
Overall, I mean, UNESCO says we need to be more ambitious in reconciling humans together with nature. What do you think they kind of, and I'll put this one to Ove, what do you think they mean by that, and where do you start?
What?
And sorry, it's a question for Ove, which is UNESCO. They say that we need to be more ambitious in reconciling humans with nature. So what do they mean, and where do you start? Ove.
Well, I think this goes back to what we were discussing before about, you know, the human element is really now very strong within ecosystems, and we're now no longer managing the way we used to, which was to bring them back into the space and, dare I say, lock people out of regions because they were important from an ecological or other point of view, to a point now where we have climate shifting the boundaries of what organisms can live in. And with that comes all sorts of new species invading into areas and so on and so forth. And if you don't then consider the human element, which is sort of like the third peg of this structure, you end up leaving out not only important information and so on, but you also don't get to the solutions. The solutions have to be a balance between, you know, people, business, and ecology if it's going to have any chance of persisting in time. And part of that is going to be getting better able to predict what's going to happen next, because that's the sort of interventions we're going to have to try and you know, take.
Interesting, you mentioned business, I suppose, because would everybody be? Does business have to be part of this?
I think when I say business, I suppose it's people earning incomes. So right. You don't want people to destroy the resource. Equally, you've got people that need food and income, and so trying to block them out of that by saying, "Oh no, we don't involve business in these decisions," and so on, I think is going to miss out again on the solutions to this.
I agree.
Yeah.
But also UNESCO, you are doing a very good job, but you have to work more with local people on mobilization of conservation, especially on livelihood aspect, because many people depend forests on livelihood activities for daily living. And you have to work more on that area, maybe mobilizing other stakeholders in the area to work together, because if we work together, we can do a big thing by working together in different disciplines, different stakeholders, including communities itself.
Interesting, yeah. Go on, Ove, sorry.
I was just going to say, and I think part of that is the fact that you need to zone things as multi-use as opposed to one lockout, one open, because it's the integration of human activities into the park successfully, which will lead to its longevity, is really important to understand. You know, where you should allow commercial fishing versus not, where you're going to facilitate different cultural groups on the landscape and so on. So it's about managing this multi-dimensional system and getting a stable outcome which will persist over time. And I'm sure that's the same with Phoebe too.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting what you're saying actually there about the living with and having various uses for the land, the reserve that you're talking about, that you don't just fence it off and say, we're looking after that bit and do what you like with the rest of it, because we won't achieve the 30% goal or the 100% of humanity caring about and engaging with nature and the ecosystems around them without having that kind of mindset change. I think we've run out of time. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody. It's been a fascinating panel, and I hope some inspiring messages. I think there are some reasons to be hopeful there from what you're achieving in different parts of the world. So thank you very much for being with us. And a couple of websites for those who are inspired by this and want to learn more. Go to unesco.org/MAB to learn more about the Man and the Biosphere program. Go to decadeonrestoration.org to learn more about the UN Decade, and oceandecade.org to learn more about the oceans. It's been great talking to you from Australia, from Vietnam, from Tanzania. Thanks very much for watching.
That's great. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Yeah.